The diesel engines of 4 patrol torpedo boats were idling against the concrete dock at Corregidor. It was dark. Across the water, less than 3 miles away, 76,000 American and Filipino soldiers were starving on the Bataan Peninsula. They had been on half rations for 2 months. Malaria had infected more than 70% of the garrison. The men were eating cavalry horses, monkeys, snakes, anything they could catch. And now, on the evening of March 11, 1942, the commanding general of all those men was climbing aboard PT-41 with his wife, his 4-year-old son, and his son's Chinese nanny. Douglas MacArthur was leaving. Within 28 days of his departure, 76,000 of those troops would surrender in the largest American capitulation since the Civil War. Within 30 days, they would begin a 65-mile forced march in 100-degree heat that would kill thousands. Within 3 years, roughly 2 out of every 3 men he left behind would be dead. MacArthur would receive the Medal of Honor. This is a story about command decisions and their consequences. And I think it reveals something uncomfortable about how America builds its heroes. To understand why MacArthur was on that dock, you have to understand the decisions he made in the months before the war that guaranteed this disaster. MacArthur had been in the Philippines since 1935, first as military advisor to President Manuel Quezon, then as Field Marshal of the Philippine Army, the only American ever to hold that rank. Eisenhower, who served as his aide, privately called the ceremony rather fantastic, and the title pompous and rather ridiculous for a virtually non-existent army. MacArthur had retired from the United States Army in 1937 and was living in a penthouse atop the Manila Hotel. When Roosevelt recalled him to active duty in July 1941, MacArthur took command of approximately 100,000 Filipino troops and 20,000 to 35,000 Americans, along with 35 B-17 bombers and 107 P-40 fighters. It was the largest American air command outside the continental United States. The Standing Defense Plan, War Plan Orange 3, was straightforward. When Japan attacks, withdraw to the Bataan Peninsula, hold it, and wait for relief. Supply planners had pre-positioned provisions for 31,000 men for 6 months. MacArthur rejected this plan as defeatist. He lobbied Washington for an aggressive alternative. He would defend the entire Philippine archipelago with beach defenses. No withdrawal from beach positions. Beaches to be held at all costs. According to Lewis Morton in the official United States Army history, The Fall of the Philippines, MacArthur's plan explicitly prohibited retreat. Washington approved it. This was the first catastrophic mistake because it scattered his forces across the islands, and it moved supplies away from Bataan to forward beach positions. When the Japanese actually came and those beach defenses collapsed, the supplies were abandoned and could not be recovered. If you're finding this valuable, subscribing genuinely helps. It tells the algorithm this kind of deep research is worth showing to more people. Now, back to the Philippines. The second disaster came on December 8, 1941, and this one is harder to explain away. MacArthur's headquarters learned of the Pearl Harbor attack at approximately 3:30 in the morning, Philippine time. General Louis Brereton, commanding the Far East Air Force, arrived at headquarters around 5, requesting permission to launch B-17 strikes against Japanese airfields on Formosa. Chief of Staff Sutherland denied him access to MacArthur and told him to wait. Brereton tried again at 7:15, blocked again. At 8:50, he called requesting the strike, told to wait. At 10, Brereton warned Sutherland directly that if Clark Field was attacked, they would lose offensive capability entirely. Denied again. MacArthur finally authorized action at 10:14. Nearly 7 hours after notification. The B-17s that had been circling without bombs began landing at Clark Field to refuel and arm. At 12:35, 53 Japanese bombers and up to 51 Zero fighters struck Clark and Iba Fields simultaneously. Japanese pilots were astonished to find American planes lined up wingtip to wingtip on the ground. In a single afternoon, Approximately 100 of 181 aircraft were destroyed or damaged. At Clark alone, 12 to 15 of the 17 B-17s were wrecked. George Marshall later said to a reporter, "I just don't know how MacArthur happened to let his planes get caught on the ground." General Hap Arnold called Brereton and demanded, "How in hell could an experienced airman like you get caught with your planes on the ground?" Post-war Japanese accounts confirmed their Formosa defenses were far from complete. Fog had delayed their launch for hours. They had been terrified of an American counterattack that never came. Pearl Harbor generated 10 investigations. Commanders Kimmel and Short were relieved. In the Philippines, no investigation was conducted. No one was court-martialed. As historian William Barch concluded, MacArthur survived the debacle because America needed a hero. And then it got worse. The main Japanese invasion force, General Hama's 14th Army, approximately 43,000 troops in 85 transports, landed at Lingayen Gulf on December 22. MacArthur's Filipino beach defenders, the 21st, 71st, 11th, and 91st Divisions, crumbled immediately. That night, MacArthur reverted to War Plan Orange, the plan he had rejected months earlier. The retreat to Bataan was militarily successful, but logistically it was a catastrophe. Supplies had been positioned for 43,000 men, more than 80,000 troops, plus 26,000 civilian refugees poured onto the peninsula. A massive rice stockpile on Luzon was never confiscated because MacArthur refused to overrule Quezon's prohibition against requisitioning Philippine government stores. According to Morton, even 20% of that rice would have fed the garrison for nearly a year. Here is where the decision becomes indefensible. On January 3, 1942, while his troops were beginning to starve on half rations of roughly 1,500 calories a day, Quezon issued an executive order transferring $500,000 from the Philippine Treasury to MacArthur's personal bank account. That is roughly $7.5 million in today's money. Additional payments went to his staff, $75,000 to Sutherland, $45,000 to Marshall, $20,000 to aide Sidney Huff. Historian Carol Patillo of Boston College discovered this payment in 1979 in Sutherland's papers. The contrast with Eisenhower is damning. Quezon later offered Eisenhower $60,000. Eisenhower declined, writing that the danger of misapprehension on the part of some individual might operate to destroy whatever usefulness he might have to the Allied cause. MacArthur never mentioned the payment in his memoirs. MacArthur's headquarters occupied the Malinta Tunnel on Corregidor, a massive bomb-proof complex 2 to 2.5 miles across the water from Bataan. Despite this proximity, MacArthur visited his frontline troops on Bataan exactly once, on January 10, 1942. He told officers that help was definitely on the way. He never returned. The troops composed a song to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Dugout Doug MacArthur lies a shaken on the rock, safe from all the bombers and from any sudden shock. Dugout Doug is eating of the best food on Bataan, and his troops go starving on. War correspondent Frank Hewlett wrote the poem that became their anthem. We're the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, no aunts, no uncles, no nephews, no nieces, no pills, no planes, no artillery pieces, and nobody gives a damn. I think MacArthur's failure here was not cowardice. Multiple sources confirm he was physically brave on Corregidor, repeatedly exposing himself to bombing and never photographed wearing a helmet. I believe the more likely explanation is worse. He could not bring himself to look those men in the face and keep lying about the reinforcements he almost certainly knew were never coming. Roosevelt's evacuation order arrived on February 22, 1942. The political reasoning was sound. MacArthur's capture would be a propaganda disaster. A senior commander was needed for the new Southwest Pacific area. Roosevelt's military aide reportedly said MacArthur was worth 5 Army Corps to American morale. MacArthur's first reaction was theatrical outrage. He waived what he claimed was his resignation and declared he would cross to Bataan and fight as a simple volunteer. Whether this was sincere remains debated. As one historian noted, MacArthur was a brave man, but so prone to theatrics it is hard to tell if he was putting on a show. At 7:30 on the evening of March 11, 4 77-foot Elco PT boats of Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 departed Corregidor under Lieutenant John Bulkley. The route covered roughly 560 miles through Japanese-controlled waters. The Sulu Sea whipped up 15 to 20-foot swells. MacArthur became violently seasick. The most dangerous moment came when PT-41 spotted the Japanese heavy cruiser Ashigara with 8-inch guns. The patrol boat, capable of only about 18 knots, took evasive action and escaped detection. Upon reaching Mindanao, MacArthur told Bulkley, "You've taken me out of the jaws of death, and I won't forget it." At Tarawa, South Australia, on March 20, MacArthur told reporters, "I came through, and I shall return." Washington asked him to change it to "We shall return." He refused. William Manchester revealed in American Caesar that the phrasing originated with Filipino journalist Carlos Romulo. This is the part the official histories gloss over. On April 9, 1942, Major General Edward King surrendered approximately 76,000 troops, roughly 12,000 Americans and 64,000 Filipinos, against MacArthur's explicit orders forbidding surrender. It was the largest American surrender since the Civil War. What followed was the Bataan Death March, 65 miles in tropical heat exceeding 100 degrees. Captain William Dias witnessed a Japanese officer behead an American captain found with Japanese currency. Marine Private First Class Irvin Scott witnessed tanks running over his comrades. Historian Stanley Falk estimated 600 to 650 Americans and 5,000 to 10,000 Filipinos died during the march itself. Only an estimated 54,000 of the 76,000 reached Camp O'Donnell. At Camp O'Donnell, designed for 10,000 men but crammed with more than 60,000, the death rate peaked at 400 per day. Approximately 26,000 Filipinos and 1,500 Americans died there. At Cabanatuan Prison Camp, 2,642 Americans died in the first year alone. The Hell ships, unmarked Japanese merchant vessels transporting prisoners to Japan and Manchuria, killed approximately 21,000 Allied prisoners of war, more than United States Marines lost in combat during the entire Pacific War. The death rate for American prisoners of war in Japanese custody was 40%. In German custody, it was 1%. 2 weeks after MacArthur's escape and 3 weeks before Bataan fell, George Marshall sent a secret memorandum recommending MacArthur for the Medal of Honor. In the cover letter, Marshall explicitly acknowledged the award did not meet normal criteria. He wrote, "While there is no specific act of General MacArthur's to justify the award of the Medal of Honor under a literal interpretation of the statutes, I feel that the services that he has rendered merit some recognition." Marshall stated the purpose plainly. The medal was intended to offset any propaganda by the enemy directed at his leaving his command. MacArthur then actively opposed the Medal of Honor nomination for Jonathan Wainwright, the man who stayed behind, fought, surrendered, and endured 3 years of brutal captivity. Historian Jonathan Horn, using newly available diary entries, documented that MacArthur shocked his superiors by formally opposing the nomination. Marshall shelved it to avoid provoking MacArthur. Wainwright received his Medal of Honor only after the war, having spent 3 years wondering whether he would face court-martial. Wainwright's diary entry from April 2, 1942, reads, "I'm going to stay in the Philippines and share the fate of my men on Corregidor. There's no other honorable course for me. I believe the evacuation itself was justified. Roosevelt's direct order left no legal choice, and MacArthur's strategic value was real. The Philippines were going to fall regardless of who commanded them." Nearly all historians agree on this narrow point, but that narrow point is not the full story. MacArthur abandoned War Plan Orange for an aggressive beach defense that collapsed on contact. He froze for 9 hours while his Air Force was destroyed on the ground. He failed to pre-position supplies on Bataan, then refused to requisition rice that could have fed his troops for a year. He visited his starving men once in 3 months. He accepted $500,000 from Quezon while those men ate monkeys and died of malaria. He promised reinforcements he knew were not coming, and he opposed the Medal of Honor for the man who stayed. MacArthur did fulfill his promise. On October 20, 1944, he waded ashore at Leyte and broadcast, "People of the Philippines, I have returned." When he met the surviving prisoners, only 1/3 of the men he had left behind were still alive. He told them, "I'm a little late, but we finally came." The defense of Bataan lasted 105 days. It delayed the Japanese timetable and bought critical time for the Allied Pacific strategy. That achievement belongs to the 76,000, not to the man on the PT boat. The battling bastards of Bataan named their situation with brutal clarity. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, and nobody gives a damn.